Hello, my name's Dr. Fiona Tolan. I'm a senior lecturer in English at Liverpool John Moores University. And I'm going to talk for some time here about Margaret Atwood's 1985 text, The Handmaid's Tale. And there's an awful lot that we could talk about in terms of this novel. So I'm going to focus on one theme in particular, which is the theme of memory, which is pervasive throughout this text. Let's think for a moment about the way in which the novel is structured. So the story is told retrospectively, and we find this out right at the end when we come to the historical notes, and we discover that this is a tale that has been uncovered more than 200 years after it was recorded by Offred, and it's been found on a kind of jumbled up collection of cassette tapes that are found in an old footlocker. They are unnumbered, unlabelled, and they have been put together by the researchers who have taken these kind of fragments of the narrative and put them together in an order that they think makes best sense. And if you think about it, we can read that as a kind of metaphor for memory and the functioning of memory and the way in which we put together cohesive memories from what are really scraps of recollection. What this tells us, of course, is that Offred did get out. She escaped, or at least she got to a safe space where she was able to take time to set down and record her account of what happened. So her memory is retrospective. The voice that we hear in the text is the voice of Offred looking back, remembering her time in Gilead. But then, of course, within that narrative, we also get odd kind of indications of memory of her time from the period before Gilead. So The Handmaid's Tale, therefore, is constructed from memories of memories. And already we start to get a sense of how vulnerable that kind of format is to notions of reliability and truth. So at the heart of Atwood's novel, we can see that there are questions about the function, the reliability, the dangers, and the power of memory. In recalling the past and recalling her version of events, Offred bears witness to the atrocities of the Gilead regime. And it's by this act of testimony that Offred's memoir, I suggest, becomes deeply political. Let's take a moment just to pay a little bit of attention to that opening or early scene in the text. What we get here is a kind of, it's a scene from the Red Centre where Offred and her fellow future handmaids are taken to be kind of indoctrinated before they take up their postings at the various commanders' houses. And we get a detailed meditation on the gymnasium as a space with a past. And Offred's imaginings of that past, as I've picked out in the quotation here, are really visceral. She seems to see, hear, smell, touch, and taste the past. So pungent is it, so evocative in this kind of very familiar space of the school gym, which is turned uncanny in the novel by its requisitioning as an indoctrination centre for fertile women. The past is also envisioned as a palimpsest. So that's a tablet onto which messages have been written, have been partially erased, and have been written over again, where the earlier writing is nevertheless still visible. So it's an image of layers, of each generation of occupants of the gym coming and going, and each leaving an indelible mark. The gymnasium with which Offred begins her narrative might also be read here as a vision of memory. And this is a vision of memory in which nothing is ever lost, in which you could dig down through the layers and eventually retrieve what you're looking for. If the gymnasium is a symbol of hope, a symbol of memory, and a symbol of the past, it's a space that is filled with ghosts. And those are the ghosts of all those who have passed through it. As Offred lies awake in the hall and able to sleep, she brings to life a succession of teenagers, picked out here in green, from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s and the 80s, as we see in this kind of roll call of evolving fashions. In this space, it seems, nothing is gone forever. The ghosts of the past linger and they make themselves heard. In much the same way, the tale that Offred is about to commence is also full of ghosts. It's full of the ghosts of all the people that Offred meets and that she recalls, all the people who the Gilead regime would erase. Offred's tale is a way of remembering, recalling and bringing back to life all those who would otherwise be forgotten by history. Let's move on now to some of the problems and the difficulties inherent in the process of remembering. And the first point to note is that memory is inherently unstable and unreliable, and this is one of the things that really haunts Offred throughout the novel. The power of the Gilead regime rests in large part on its capacity to assert a single totalitizing vision, totalizing, irresistible vision or worldview. There can be no other perspectives, no other alternatives, no other possible ways of being outside of those that the state endorses and condones. And part of the way in which the regime goes about asserting and shoring up its authority is by erasing much of the record of the time before its own existence. So, for example, in one scene, Offred walks around the city that she once knew very well, and she finds the experience peculiarly disorientating. Street signs and shop signs have been removed. Old statues and other civic markers have been taken down. All the signs and the codes by which she once knew the spaces of the city have been erased. So instead, she has to rely on her memory. And at one point she recognises some of the large houses in an affluent district. Doctors lived here once, she recalls. Lawyers, university professors. However, there are no lawyers anymore and the university is closed. The very real danger here is that Offred's memories of the once familiar city cannot be corroborated. Offred can't discuss her recollections of the city with anyone else. She has got no access to the documents of the city, to city plans or photographs or even street names. The institutions that once marked out the various zones of the city, like the university, for example, are now gone. The city itself is renamed, the maps are redrawn. All that is left are scraps of unreliable memory. And memory comes to Offred in the novel in kind of fits and starts. At one point, she tells us, "Sometimes I sing to myself in my head, something lugubrious, mournful, Presbyterian. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound could save a wretch like me, who once was lost but now am found, was bound but now am free. I don't know if the words are right, I can't remember. Such songs are not sung anymore in public, especially the ones that use words like free." The irony here, of course, is that the words are not right. The final lines of the opening stanza of that hymn actually read, "Who once was lost but now am found, was blind but now can see." As readers, we spot that error, but for Offred, there's no way to correct it. And she doesn't even know if a mistake has been made. And of course, there's a further irony in the fact that the line that she misrecalls, that speaks to imprisonment and freedom, is actually more powerful to her in her current situation. But what's particularly worrying about this small little instance of misremembering is the idea that not only are things being forgotten, but that one might not even notice that something has been lost. For Offred, this begs the question, if she's living in a time when small things, like the lines of a hymn, can just fall out of the collective archive, and large things, like the topography of a whole city, can be manipulated, can be erased, denied, rewritten, what hope does Offred have of resisting Gilead's version of reality? And one of the things that Offred constantly worries about in the text is that she is losing her memories, that particularly that without photographs she's forgetting what Luke looked like, that potentially she might forget what her daughter looked like, what she sounded like. Memories are too insubstantial, they're too nebulous to hold on to. They sort of slip through the fingers like smoke. Offred's greatest fear is that her memories will fade, and her greatest fear is precisely what the Gilead regime is hoping for. At one point in the Red Centre, Lydia says to the handmaids, "You are a transitional generation. It's hardest for you. For the ones who come after you, it will be easier. They will accept their duties with willing hearts." She did not say, because they will have no memories of any other way. She said, because they won't want things they can't have. The Gilead regime is moving inexorably towards an anticipated moment when its inhabitants will not remember anything before or outside of the status quo. Why is that? Why are they so desperate to achieve that point? Well, it's because a population that cannot remember another way of life cannot imagine another way of life, or at least that's what the regime is hoping for. Gilead looks to a time when its population will be entirely compliant because they will not know, as Offred knows, that there is another way of being in the world. As Aunt Lydia puts it, they won't want things they can't have. And as a member of the transitional generation, those who can remember what it was once like to be free, Offred's memories are under sustained attack by the state. And her constant fear and anxiety in the text is that the state is winning that battle, that it will soon conquer her memories and her past, and thus her selfhood. So we can see that memory is absolutely crucial in the novel. It's crucial to Offred, but it's also crucial to the state. And it's worth reflecting on that point of just why memory is so important to the Gilead state. And it's because this act of recalling a time in which Gilead did not exist is a very short conceptual step away from thinking about a time when Gilead might not exist again in the future. Each time Offred's memories impose themselves on the present day narrative, they highlight the fragility and the transience of historical periods. If there was a time before Gilead, then there can presumably be a time after Gilead. So a memory of the past becomes a hope for the future. And there's an example here of this at work in the text. Offred talks about remembering the past in this point, and she says, "I think about laundromats, what I wore to them, shorts, jeans, jogging pants, what I put into them, my own clothes, my own soap, my own money I had earned myself. I think about having such control." Consider how memory works in this extract. So this takes place when Offred and Ofglen are walking along the street, and their behaviour at this moment is entirely compliant, obedient, submissive. But as her mind starts to wander, as she starts to think about Aunt Lydia and her teachings about how the past was dangerous for women, she also starts to think about all these other things, about laundromats. She remembers her clothes, which are now unthinkable. Imagine wearing shorts. Then she remembers the economic autonomy that she once unthinkingly enjoyed. My clothes, my own money. And from that is a very short step towards the line, "I think about having such control." And there's a wonderful Atwoodian ambiguity in that line. Offred doesn't say, "I remember having such control." She says, "I think about having such control." Control, power, autonomy have suddenly become thinkable. We see here how a simple train of thought that begins with a single memory about a laundromat quickly escalates into a statement of defiant resistance. So the Gileadian authorities, Atwood tells us, are right to fear memory. The critic Anne Whitehead tells us, as Derrida indicates, there is a discernible discrimination at work in the relation between memory and writing, so that the issue of who gets to write in the first place and who is then subsequently absorbed into the archive is profoundly marked by gender, as well as by class and race. So simply put, those who have power get to write history. They get to determine what passes into the historical record. Those instead who have traditionally been without power, whether due to gender, race or class, their stories, their memories are not written down. They do not become part of the official historical record. And we see this being played out to dramatic effect in The Handmaid's Tale, of course. Offred is completely without power, and she is being erased from the documented narrative of the state. She doesn't even have a name to be recorded. Offred has been condemned to silence. Her function is to be a silent, passive vessel. She is to be seen and not heard. She's forbidden to read and to write. She's barely allowed to speak apart from certain kind of prescribed phrases. Blessed be the fruit, praise be, and so on. Her destiny is to be written out of history. By recording her narrative, Offred partakes in what Atwood, from this article here, terms the literature of witness. And the fact that Offred lays claims to her memories by making a recording that is later recovered and documented, this act is a spectacular victory for Offred. So even though the ending of the novel is very determinedly and purposely problematic, just this act of giving voice to her memories of the past is, for Offred, Atwood assures us, a spectacular, striking act of political resistance.